My grandfather's study still smelled of cedarwood and old paper, a scent I had known my entire life. But now it was suffocating me. His portrait on the wall with its kind eyes and warm smile seemed to look down on me with disappointment. My father Edward sat behind his antique mahogany desk, the leather chair groaning under his weight, as if protesting the presence of a stranger. He had symbolically claimed this territory as soon as the will reading was over. The thick last will and testament lay on the desk between us, a paper barrier confirming the unbelievable. The entire Ashworth estate, the $56 million handcrafted furniture company, Ashworth Artisans, and the Oakhaven house I had grown up in now belonged to him. The lawyers have made it clear. Edward said, his voice as cold and final as a judge's gavel. He loosened his tie, a gesture of a man who had just closed a successful business deal, not a son who had buried his father 2 days prior. I stood there, my hands clenched into fists, a numb feeling spreading through my body. I had never expected a large share of the fortune, as my grandfather Arthur had taught me, that a person's worth wasn't measured by their bank account. But to be cut out completely, to be erased from the legacy of the man who had raised me, felt like the ultimate betrayal. "I don't understand," I whispered, my voice lost in grief and disbelief. "Grandfather would never—" Edward cut me off, impatience etched on his face. "Oh, come now, Clara. Did you really think he would leave the company to someone who knows nothing about business? You were a caregiver. That role is over." He stood walking around the desk to look me directly in the eye. There was no warmth in his gaze, only cold calculation. "You were useful when my father needed a nursemaid. Now you're useless." The words were as cruel and sharp as a shard of broken glass, cutting deep into my heart. My breath caught in my throat. For all these years I had tried to find a shred of affection, a hint of recognition from this man, but all I ever received was indifference. Now that there was nothing left to gain from me, he cast me aside without a second thought. "I'll give you until morning to pack your things," he added, turning his back to me as if the conversation was over. He pulled out his phone. "I've already called the contractors to start renovations on Monday." His cruelty stunned me. Renovations. This house was a sanctuary of memories. Every scratch on the floorboards, every book on the shelves told a story of my life with my grandfather. And he wanted to erase it all. "You can't do that," I protested, my voice trembling. "This is my home." "This was my father's home," Edward corrected coldly, not bothering to look at me. "And now it's mine." He put the phone to his ear. "Yes, it's me. Proceed with the plans. Demolish the West Wing library first. I want a modern entertainment room." I backed away, feeling like a stranger in my own home. The library. It was where Grandfather Arthur had taught me to read, where we had spent countless hours by the fireplace, him telling me about the different types of wood, about the soul within each grain. I remembered one rainy afternoon when he handed me a piece of oak and said, "Look here, Clara. See these lines? They tell the story of sunny summers and harsh winters. To see a person's true worth, watch how they treat others when they think no one is looking." And now my father, under the gaze of his own father's portrait, had shown his true colors. I turned away, tears blurring my vision, and started up the stairs to my room. Each step was heavy. The loss of my grandfather was now compounded by the cruel abandonment of my father. I hadn't just lost my beloved grandparent, but my home, my past, and the last illusion of having a father. I entered my childhood bedroom, where everything was just as it had always been. Stuffed animals sat on the chair. The collection of seashells we'd gathered at Cape Cod was arranged neatly on the windowsill. I sat on the edge of the bed, an empty feeling consuming me. Tomorrow morning. I had less than 12 hours to pack 23 years of my life into a few suitcases. Where would I go? What would I do? The future stretched before me like a dark and uncertain abyss. In that moment, surrounded by the walls that had witnessed all my joys and sorrows, I felt more alone than ever. Sleep didn't come. I lay in my childhood bed, listening to the familiar creaks and whispers of the house. Every tick of the grandfather clock downstairs, every groan of the floorboards as the house settled in the night, felt like a farewell. Throughout the night, I sorted through 23 years of memories trying to decide what I could take and what had to be left behind. Every object I touched was a fragment of memory. The small wooden bird Grandfather Arthur had carved for me on my 7th birthday, its lines worn smooth from years of being held. The collection of old hardcover books we had hunted for together in secondhand shops, their papery scent the smell of cozy Saturday afternoons. The black and white photograph of my grandmother and grandfather on their wedding day, her smile as bright as a promise. I had just placed the last stack of books into my second suitcase when I heard unfamiliar voices downstairs. I instinctively glanced at the clock. It was only 7 in the morning. Edward hadn't wasted a second. When I trudged down the stairs carrying 2 heavy suitcases, the scene in the foyer made my heart clench. 2 men in security uniforms were speaking with Edward. A locksmith was fiddling with the front door lock. "Ah, there you are," my father said when he saw me on the stairs. His voice was casual, as if this were any other morning. "These gentlemen will be supervising the transfer of the property. They'll escort you out when you're ready." "You hired security to throw me out of my own home?" I asked, disbelief coloring my voice. "A standard precaution during a transfer of ownership," he replied smoothly, sipping coffee from my grandfather's favorite porcelain mug. "Nothing personal." But it was personal. Everything about this situation was deeply, painfully personal. I watched the locksmith, the metallic clicks echoing offensively in the tense silence. "You're already changing the locks." My voice broke despite my efforts to remain calm. "Of course. This property contains valuable assets." Edward glanced at his watch, his impatience obvious. "How much longer will you be? I have meetings this afternoon." The 2 security guards looked uncomfortable, shifting their weight and avoiding eye contact. They were just doing their jobs, but the human part of them recognized the cruelty unfolding before them. "I need help with these," I said, indicating my suitcases. One of the guards immediately stepped forward to help, relief clear on his face at having a concrete task to perform. As we descended the stairs, memories flooded me with each step. This was the banister I had slid down as a child despite Arthur's gentle scolding. The wall where pencil marks charted my growth over the years. The reading nook where my grandfather and I had spent countless hours sharing books and ideas. Edward stood by the door, keys in hand, clearly eager to take full possession of his prize. As the guard loaded my suitcases into my modest Honda, I took one last look around the foyer. The crystal chandelier caught the morning light, scattering rainbows across the hardwood floor. How many times had Grandfather pointed out those rainbow patterns to delight me as a child? "Is that everything?" Edward asked, his impatience barely veiled. I nodded, unable to speak around the lump in my throat. "Good. The firm's lawyers will be in touch if there are any remaining formalities." He offered his hand mechanically, as if closing a business meeting. I stared at the offered hand but didn't take it. Some pretenses were too hollow to maintain. Without a word, I walked past him and out the door of the only real home I had ever known. The guard who had carried my bags gave me a sympathetic nod. "I'm sorry, miss," he said quietly out of Edward's earshot. The drive to the Lakeside Inn was a blur of tears and disbelief. I had chosen the affordable hotel because it offered weekly rates, and I needed time to figure out my next steps. My savings wouldn't last long, especially with my income having dwindled during the months I was caring for Arthur. The hotel room was clean but impersonal. Its beige walls and generic art were a stark contrast to the character-filled house I had just left. I placed my grandmother's wool blanket on the bed, a small attempt to make the space feel less foreign. Then I sat by the window and finally allowed myself to completely break down. The grief came in waves, not just for Arthur now, but for the father I'd never really had, and for the security I had lost in one cruel act. By the next morning, I forced myself to shower and dress, going through the motions of normalcy while feeling anything but. My phone showed a few missed calls from friends, but I couldn't bear to explain my circumstances yet. Instead, I began researching apartment rentals in the area. The prices were a shock much higher than I had anticipated. The future stretched out before me, uncertain and terrifying. My phone rang just after noon, displaying an unknown number. I almost ignored it, assuming it was a telemarketer, but some instinct prompted me to answer. "Clara Ashworth," a formal voice asked. "Yes, this is she. This is Patricia from Daniel Peterson's law office. Mr. Peterson would like to see you this afternoon if you're available." My heart skipped a beat. Did she say what it was about? Only that it pertains to your grandfather's estate and is a matter of some urgency. We arranged an appointment for 3 p.m. I spent the intervening hours speculating on the meeting's purpose. Perhaps there was some small bequest Mr. Peterson had failed to mention in the official reading. Or maybe there were personal items Arthur had specifically designated for me. The law office was in a historic downtown building. Its interior was a study in old-world elegance. Dark wood paneling lined the walls and leather-bound law books filled the built-in shelves. I gave my name to the receptionist and was immediately shown to Mr. Peterson's private office. The elderly lawyer stood to greet me, his expression warmer than the professional demeanor he had maintained at the will reading. "Thank you for coming on such short notice, Clara," he said, gesturing to a comfortable chair opposite his desk. "I imagine you've had a difficult 24 hours. The simple acknowledgement of my pain broke something inside me. To my embarrassment, tears welled in my eyes. "Yes," I managed to say. "Edward had security escort me out this morning." Mr. Peterson's eyebrows rose. "Did he now? That timing is very interesting." "What do you mean?" I asked, my confusion replacing my grief. A small smile played on the corners of his mouth. "Did your father read the complete will, Clara?" Mr. Peterson's question hung in the air between us. I looked at him, utterly confused. The complete will I was at the reading. Edward inherited everything. The old lawyer leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "Yes, the main provisions were read aloud, as is customary. But did Edward bother to review the full document afterward, the attached conditions and clauses?" "He told you to send a summary to his office," I recalled. "He said he had the important parts." A small chuckle escaped Mr. Peterson's lips. "Ah, that is the Edward Ashworth I have known for 30 years, always too impatient for the details." He opened a leather briefcase and removed a thick document bound in blue. "Your grandfather anticipated this exact behavior." My heart beat faster. "What do you mean?" "Arthur and I spent quite some time crafting this will, especially in the last year as his health declined." Mr. Peterson put on his reading glasses and flipped to a marked page. "The inheritance does indeed go to Edward, but with very specific conditions attached." He cleared his throat and began to read. "The inheritance for my son, Edward Arthur Ashworth, is conditional upon his agreement to provide lifelong support for my granddaughter, Clara Ann Ashworth, including but not limited to housing in the family residence, a monthly stipend of $10,000 for living expenses, and the coverage of all educational and healthcare costs she may incur." My jaw dropped. Mr. Peterson continued reading. "Should Edward fail to fulfill these obligations at any time, or should he act in a way that causes Clara significant distress or hardship, then the entire estate, including Ashworth Artisans and all related assets, will immediately and irrevocably transfer to Clara Ann Ashworth." The room seemed to spin around me. But he's already violated that condition. He threw me out this morning." Mr. Peterson's eyes twinkled. "Precisely. And in doing so, less than 24 hours after the reading of the will, he has defaulted on the primary condition of his inheritance." "So what does that mean?" I asked, barely able to process the implications. "It means, my dear girl, that according to the legally binding terms of your grandfather's will, you are now the sole owner of Ashworth Artisans and all related assets valued at approximately $56 million. I gasped, my hand flying to my mouth. The room seemed to tilt, the leather-bound law books on the shelves blurring into a smear of brown and gold. Mr. Peterson's words echoed in my ears, a concept too vast, too seismic, to immediately comprehend. $56 million. Ashworth Artisans. The house. It was all mine. "That can't be right," I stammered, my voice barely a whisper. There must be some mistake. There is no mistake, Mr. Peterson said, his voice calm and sure, my only anchor in a storm of emotions. Arthur knew his son better than anyone. He told me in private, Daniel Edward will show his true colors within a week, probably within a day. As it turns out, his prediction was quite accurate. But why do it this way? I asked, trying to understand the logic of the grandfather I had loved so dearly. Why not just leave everything to me directly? Mr. Peterson's expression softened. Because your grandfather was a wise man who understood human nature, Clara. He wanted to give Edward one last chance to do the right thing. A chance to be the father he should have been. The old lawyer's face grew somber. But he also wanted to protect you. That's why he created this mechanism, a test that he knew almost for certain his son would fail. The truth of it hit me with a powerful force. It wasn't an act of abandonment. It was an act of ultimate protection disguised within a bitter lesson. My grandfather hadn't forgotten me. He had trusted me. Does Edward know about this? I asked. Mr. Peterson shook his head. Not yet, and his reaction should be quite something to witness. Your father was so eager to count his millions that he didn't bother to read the document that granted them to him. A small, dry chuckle escaped him. In my 40 years of practicing law, I have rarely seen justice dispense itself so swiftly. The realization of what had happened began to sink in. The house I had been evicted from this morning was now legally mine. The company I had always felt so distant from was now my responsibility. I don't know how to run a furniture company, I said, panic creeping into my voice. Arthur accounted for that as well. Mr. Peterson pulled another document from his briefcase. This letter explains his wishes for your transition. He suggests retaining the current executive team while you learn the ropes with specific recommendations for mentors within the company. He had great faith in you, Clara. Tears welled in my eyes again, but these were different from the ones I had shed in the hotel room. These were tears of gratitude, of feeling seen and cherished by the man who had raised me. There's more, Mr. Peterson continued. Arthur left video messages for both you and Edward. He requested they be viewed together in my presence. I suggest we arrange that meeting for tomorrow morning. Does it have to be together? I asked, dreading another confrontation with my father. Your grandfather was very specific about that request. I believe he wanted Edward to witness your reaction, and vice versa. Mr. Peterson checked his calendar. Shall we say 10 a.m. tomorrow in the conference room here? I nodded, still overwhelmed by this reversal of fortune. In the meantime, Mr. Peterson said, handing me a business card, this is the contact information for the estate's security firm. You may want them to meet you at the house later today. For what? A smile played across his wrinkled face. To change the locks back, of course. It's your house now, Clara. When I left the law office, the world looked different. The streets I had driven through in despair this morning now seemed full of possibility. I called Angela, my best friend, to cancel my stay, explaining briefly that circumstances had changed dramatically. Are you okay? She asked, concern evident in her voice. I think I'm going to be... I answered honestly. For the first time in days, I think I'm going to be okay. My next call was to the security firm. They agreed to meet me at the house at 5 p.m. to change the locks and update the security system. The representative didn't seem surprised by my request, making me wonder if Mr. Peterson had already given them a heads up. I drove to the estate, slowly rehearsing what I would say if Edward was still there. Part of me hoped he would be gone, postponing our inevitable confrontation until the formal meeting tomorrow. Another part wanted to witness his reaction to learning how swiftly his actions had cost him everything. As I turned into the circular driveway, I saw Edward's sleek black Mercedes still parked by the front door. My stomach tightened with nerves, but I forced myself to continue. This was my house now, not his. My grandfather had made that clear in the most definitive way possible. The security team arrived precisely on time, 3 uniformed officers in a company van. I met them at the entrance, explaining that ownership of the property had legally transferred to me and showing them the documentation Mr. Peterson had provided as proof. We'll need to inform the current occupant of the change in status, the lead officer explained professionally. I nodded. I understand. Edward answered the door himself, his expression shifting from annoyance to shock when he saw me standing with the security team. What is this? He demanded. The lead officer stepped forward. Sir, we have been authorized to change the security protocols on this property at the request of the new legal owner, Ms. Clara Ashworth. Edward's face flushed. That's ridiculous. I have been the owner of this property since yesterday. I'm afraid there's been a development with the will, Father, I said, finding strength in the truth. You might want to contact Mr. Daniel Peterson for clarification. There was a condition to your inheritance that you violated when you evicted me this morning. What condition? What are you talking about? His voice rose an octave. Perhaps we should continue this conversation inside. I suggested, aware of the security team witnessing this family drama. Edward stepped back, allowing us to enter. The security team kept a professional distance, focusing on their technical tasks, while Edward and I moved to the study. Explain, he demanded once the door was closed behind us. Grandfather's will stipulated that you were to provide for me, including letting me live here. By forcing me to leave, you voided the terms of the will. I kept my voice calm, stating facts rather than accusations. Edward's face went pale as the implications sank in. That's impossible. Peterson would have mentioned something so significant at the reading. It's in the full document that you didn't bother to read, I replied. We have a meeting with Mr. Peterson at 10 a.m. tomorrow to officially discuss everything. For a moment, Edward seemed to deflate before my eyes. Then his expression hardened. This is some kind of trick. You and that old lawyer cooked this up together. The will was written and notarized months ago, I said. Grandfather knew exactly what would happen. He gave you a chance to do the right thing, and you failed within 24 hours. The head of the security team knocked politely before entering. Excuse me, Ms. Ashworth. The exterior locks have been changed. Where would you like the new keys delivered? Edward stared at the man, then back at me, the reality of the situation finally breaking through his denial. This is my house, he insisted, but his voice lacked conviction. Not anymore, I said simply. I'll take the keys now, thank you. As the security officer handed me the set of keys, I witnessed something I had never seen before. My father looked completely lost. The arrogance that had defined him for my entire life was gone, replaced by the dawning understanding that he had outsmarted himself. You can't do this to me, he said, but it sounded more like a question than a statement. I'm not doing this, I replied softly. You did this to yourself. The next morning, I arrived at Mr. Peterson's office 15 minutes early. My stomach in knots. Despite being on solid legal ground, I still felt intimidated by the prospect of confronting my father. Years of seeking his approval had conditioned me to shrink in his presence. You look just like your mother, Mr. Peterson remarked as he escorted me into the conference room. She had that same quiet strength. The comparison bolstered my confidence. I had rarely heard anyone speak of my mother, and the connection felt meaningful at this confrontational moment. The conference room featured a large oak table with leather chairs and a wall-mounted screen. Mr. Peterson had a laptop set up connected to the projector. Arthur recorded these messages just 2 months ago, he explained. He was very specific about the viewing order. At precisely 10 a.m., Edward walked in accompanied by a sharp-faced man in an expensive suit. This is Richard Dalton, my attorney, he announced without preamble. Mr. Peterson nodded politely. Good morning, Counselor Dalton. I must inform you that this is not a negotiation or a legal proceeding, but a family matter as stipulated in Arthur Ashworth's will. Your presence is not forbidden, but it will not change the outcome of today's meeting. Edward sat down across from me, his expression a careful mask. The shock of yesterday was gone, replaced by a calculated composure. Clara, this misunderstanding can be easily resolved, he began. I'm prepared to allow you to stay in the guest house while we work out a reasonable arrangement. There is no misunderstanding, Mr. Peterson interjected. The terms of the will were clear, and Edward violated them within a day of the initial reading. Before we discuss any potential arrangements, Arthur requested you both watch these messages. Mr. Peterson dimmed the lights and started the first video. My grandfather's face filled the screen, causing a lump to form in my throat. He was sitting in his study looking frailer than I remembered, but with the same clear-eyed intensity that had defined him his entire life. Edward, he began speaking directly to his son. If you are watching this, then you have done exactly what I predicted. You have shown Clara the door the moment you believed you had secured your inheritance. My father shifted uncomfortably in his chair. I have watched you your entire life chase after wealth, believing it would bring you the contentment that has always eluded you. The company was never enough. The house was never enough. No amount of money could fill the emptiness I saw in you. Arthur paused, his expression softening slightly. I gave you one final test, son. A chance to prove that family meant more to you than property. All you had to do was share your abundance with your daughter, the only child you will ever have. Instead, you showed her the same coldness you have shown her for her entire life. Edward's lawyer scribbled furiously while my father's face grew redder by the second. I built Ashworth Artisans from nothing, Arthur continued. My own hands bled laying the first foundation stones. I worked alongside every crew until my body would no longer allow it. I did not build this legacy for it to become a monument to greed. The room was utterly silent as Arthur leaned closer to the camera. The company now belongs to Clara, as does the house and all related assets. This is not a punishment, Edward. It is the natural consequence of your choices. You have always valued money over relationships. Now you have neither. The video ended, leaving a heavy silence. Edward stared at the blank screen, his expression unreadable. There is also a message for Clara, Mr. Peterson said quietly, starting the second video. My grandfather reappeared, his expression much warmer this time. My dearest Clara, he began, bringing immediate tears to my eyes. If you are watching this, then everything has transpired as I anticipated. I am sorry for the pain Edward has caused you, but not surprised by it. Arthur smiled gently. You have shown me the true meaning of family through your actions, not just your words. The way you cared for me in my final months was a gift I could never repay, but I can ensure your future is secure. He leaned forward, his eyes seeming to look directly into mine. Ashworth Artisans is yours now. Do not be intimidated by this responsibility. You have a natural understanding of people that Edward never possessed. The company needs your heart as much as your head. My grandfather held up a framed photograph. I recognized a picture of my mother and me when I was about 5 years old. Sarah would be so proud of the woman you have become. Lead with compassion, Clara, but never mistake it for weakness. You are stronger than you think. As the second video ended, I wiped the tears from my cheeks. Edward sat motionless, his lawyer whispering urgently in his ear. Mr. Peterson turned the lights back up. There is one final part to Arthur's message, a letter addressed to both of you. He pulled an envelope from his briefcase and broke the seal. Arthur requested this be read aloud in the presence of both. The letter was short, but powerful. Edward and Clara. While the legal ownership of the company and property now rests solely with Clara, I leave a path for reconciliation. Should Edward demonstrate a genuine change of heart and contribute meaningfully to the company over a period of no less than 2 years, Clara may, at her sole discretion, consider sharing a portion of the ownership with him. This decision rests entirely with Clara and must come from a place of authentic relationship, not obligation or manipulation. Mr. Peterson folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. That concludes Arthur's final messages. An uncomfortable silence filled the room. Edward's lawyer whispered something else to him, but he waved the man into silence for the first time I could remember. My father looked defeated. This can't be legal, he finally said, but the conviction had drained from his voice. I assure you it is perfectly legal, Mr. Peterson replied. The conditions were clearly stated in the will. You chose not to read it in its entirety. My office filed the necessary paperwork to transfer all assets to Clara effective as of yesterday afternoon when you violated the terms. Edward turned to me, his expression shifting from anger to something that looked like desperation. Clara, be reasonable. I am your father. This company has been my future for decades. You know nothing about running a furniture business. I can learn, I answered simply. Grandfather believed I could. I made a mistake yesterday. Edward admitted, his tone shifting to one I had never heard from him, almost pleading. I was overcome with grief and wasn't thinking clearly. We can work this out as a family. Family, I repeated the word, the bitter taste of it on my tongue. You have never treated me like family. Even when my mother was dying, you were distant. Grandfather raised me while you chased business deals. Yesterday wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. It was consistent with how you have always treated me. Edward leaned forward, switching tactics. I can change. I will show you. Let me move into the guest house and we can run the company together, father and daughter, the way it should have been. His sudden transformation was so transparent, it would have been comical under other circumstances. The man who had coldly told me I was useless 24 hours earlier was now playing the role of a concerned father. I don't think that's appropriate at this time, I said carefully. I need time to understand the business and establish myself as the new owner without any confusion about leadership. You're making a mistake, Edward warned, a flash of his true self showing through the facade. The board respects me. The clients know me. They won't accept you. Mr. Peterson intervened smoothly. Actually, I spoke with the executive board this morning. They have been informed of the transfer and have expressed their full support for Clara. Arthur discussed this contingency with each of them over the past year. This revelation seemed to shake Edward more than anything else. He planned all of this. He hoped it would not be necessary, Mr. Peterson corrected. But yes, he was well prepared for every scenario. Edward stood up abruptly. This isn't over. I'll contest the will. You are free to try, Mr. Peterson replied calmly. However, I should mention that Arthur included a no-contest clause. Any legal challenge automatically triggers a complete forfeiture of the provision that would have allowed you the possibility of earning back a share of the company through good faith efforts. My father's lawyer placed a restraining hand on his arm. We should discuss our options in private, Edward. As they prepared to leave, I found my voice. Father, I said, using the term, though it felt foreign. Grandfather left you a way back if you want it. Not to control things, but to be a part of the legacy he built. That opportunity is real, but only if your change is real too. Edward paused at the door, his back to me. For a moment I thought he might respond with something genuine. Instead, he squared his shoulders and walked out without another word. Mr. Peterson waited until the door was closed before speaking. That went about as expected. Your grandfather predicted Edward would try to challenge the will before considering the path of reconciliation. Will he actually contest it? I asked. He may try, but he cannot win. Arthur and I created an ironclad document, and Edward's actions yesterday provided an immediate and documented breach of the terms. Mr. Peterson gathered his papers. Now shall we discuss your transition into company leadership? There is quite a bit to cover. As we moved to Mr. Peterson's office to begin planning my unexpected future, I felt a strange mixture of emotions. Sadness for what might have been with my father, gratitude for my grandfather's foresight, and something surprising, a growing confidence that maybe I was more prepared for this responsibility than I initially thought. Arthur had entrusted me with his legacy. It was now up to me to prove myself worthy of that trust. The weight of the keys felt different now that they represented not just a house, but a legacy. As I unlocked the front door of my grandfather's house, now legally mine, the familiar creak of the hinge welcomed me home. That first night alone in the sprawling estate was both comforting and disorienting. I slept in my childhood bedroom instead of claiming the master suite, needing the embrace of familiar surroundings. The morning brought a flurry of calls and emails, most expressing congratulations on my new position as CEO of Ashworth Artisans. Some were genuine from employees who had known me since I was a child. Others carried a thinly veiled skepticism about my abilities. I saved them all, making a mental note of allies and potential challenges ahead. My first week as the company owner was a crash course in woodworking management. I spent hours with department heads reviewing active projects and financial statements. Evenings were dedicated to studying industry reports and company histories. Arthur had built a solid organization with a strong executive team, which made my learning curve less steep than it might have been. Edward made his first attempt at reconciliation exactly 7 days after our meeting at Mr. Peterson's office. He arrived unannounced at the house carrying an expensive bottle of wine and wearing a practiced look of humility. "I thought we could talk," he said when I answered the door. "Father to daughter." I invited him into the living room, but left his bottle of wine unopened. "What did you want to discuss?" "I've been reflecting on Arthur's message," he began, perching uncomfortably on the edge of the sofa. "Perhaps I have been too focused on the business aspects of life." "Perhaps," I echoed, waiting for him to continue. "I want another chance," Edward said, leaning forward earnestly. "To be the father I should have been to guide you in running the company." His performance was almost convincing. The slight tension around his eyes was the only tell that his words were tactical, not heartfelt. "I appreciate the offer," I replied carefully, "but I think we need to establish trust before we discuss any business arrangements. Perhaps we could start with regular family dinners completely separate from company matters." Edward's smile faltered slightly. "Of course, though, my expertise would be valuable during this transition. The Jefferson contract alone requires delicate handling." And there it was, the true purpose of his visit revealed. The Jefferson contract was the company's largest current project worth millions in revenue. "The Jefferson situation is being handled," I assured him. "I met with Mr. Robert Jefferson yesterday. We restructured the timeline to accommodate their budget adjustments." Edward couldn't hide his surprise. "You met with Bob in person. He rarely takes meetings with anyone below the executive level." Apparently he made an exception for Arthur's granddaughter. I didn't mention that the meeting had gone exceptionally well, with Mr. Jefferson expressing relief to be dealing with someone who valued relationships over the immediate bottom line. Our conversation continued in this vein, with Edward making overtures of family connection that ultimately circled back to business advantages. After an hour, he left with a promise to call soon about that family dinner. We both knew he wouldn't. Over the next few weeks, Edward tried different approaches. Sometimes he feigned vulnerability, hinting at health concerns or loneliness. Other times, he arrived with business associates, attempting to leverage their presence to gain access to company operations. Once he even brought old family photos, a transparent attempt at emotional manipulation. Each visit followed the same pattern: initial warmth, followed by increasingly obvious attempts to regain control of the company. Each time I maintained the boundary while leaving the door open for a genuine relationship, as my grandfather had wished. Meanwhile, I was finding my footing at Ashworth Artisans. My background in marketing proved unexpectedly valuable as we expanded our digital presence and modernized client communications. The executive team, once wary, began bringing problems to me, directly discovering that my perspective often brought fresh solutions. 3 months after inheriting the company, I made my first major decision to establish the Arthur Ashworth Foundation, dedicated to providing vocational education for underprivileged youth. The foundation would create career pathways in woodworking while honoring my grandfather's belief in opportunity for all. The announcement garnered positive press and industry attention. Edward showed up to the launch event uninvited, positioning himself near me for photo opportunities, as if he had been involved in the planning. I didn't correct the reporters who assumed he was supporting the initiative, choosing to focus on the foundation's mission instead of family politics. That evening, as the event wound down, Edward approached me at the bar. "A smart move with the foundation," he said, signaling for a scotch. "Good publicity." "It's not about publicity," I corrected. "It's about honoring grandfather's values." Edward studied me over the rim of his glass. "You really believe that, don't you? That business can be about more than the bottom line?" "I do." I met his gaze, and so did grandfather. Something shifted in Edward's expression, a flicker of recognition that perhaps he had fundamentally misunderstood something important about Arthur's legacy. "He left you more than the company, didn't he?" Edward said quietly. "He left you his perspective." It was the most genuine thing my father had said since the inheritance transfer. For a moment I saw a glimpse of what our relationship might have been under different circumstances. "Yes," I admitted, "and that's worth more than $56 million." Edward nodded, slowly drained his glass in silence, and left without his usual offer to get involved in the business. It would be another 3 weeks before I heard from him. During those 3 weeks of silence, I made another significant decision. After much consideration, I established a modest trust for Edward, providing him with a comfortable living without any control over the company's assets. Legally, Mr. Peterson advised against it, but personally he supported me. "Your grandfather would approve of your compassion," the old lawyer told me. "Just be careful. Don't let it be mistaken for weakness." When Edward learned of the trust, his reaction surprised me. Instead of seeing it as an opportunity to negotiate for more, he accepted it with a quiet dignity. Our next meeting had a different tone, less calculated and more reflective. Slowly over the following months, something like a genuine relationship began to form between us. It was fragile and often awkward, built on tentative conversations about neutral topics. For the first time, Edward spoke of his own childhood, revealing complexities in his relationship with Arthur that I had never considered. He talked about the pressure of being the only son of a self-made man, a giant shadow he always felt he could never escape. He admitted his jealousy of the easy rapport I had with my grandfather, a connection he, as the son, had never managed to achieve. "I was always trying to impress him with numbers, with profits," he confessed one evening as we sat on the veranda watching the sunset. You just had to be yourself." A year after inheriting Ashworth Artisans, I invited Edward to join a newly formed advisory board alongside industry experts and community leaders. The position offered prestige, but limited authority, a step toward inclusion without compromising the company's direction. "Thank you for this opportunity," he said when I extended the offer. "I won't let you down." "I hope not," I replied honestly. "Grandfather wanted you to have a path back. This is part of that path." The healing between us was not complete, and perhaps it never would be. Some wounds leave permanent scars, but the journey from the cruel dismissal on the day after the funeral to our current cautious partnership represented a growth neither of us had thought possible. As for Ashworth Artisans, the company thrived under my leadership. We maintained the core values Arthur had established while expanding into sustainable crafting methods and community development projects. The Arthur Ashworth Foundation grew to support dozens of students each year, creating a pipeline of talented, dedicated craftspeople who brought new energy to the industry. The most profound change, however, was within me. The girl who had desperately sought her father's approval had become a woman confident in her own judgment. The uncertainty I had felt upon inheriting the company had transformed into a quiet self-assurance. I had honored my grandfather's legacy not by preserving it unchanged, but by thoughtfully evolving it. 2 years to the day after Arthur's death, I visited his grave alone. The simple headstone bore his name and dates along with the inscription he had chosen. "True wealth is measured in lives touched, not dollars earned." "You were right about so many things," I told him, placing fresh roses beside the stone. "About the company, about Dad, about me." The autumn wind rustled the nearby trees, scattering golden leaves across the cemetery grounds. In that quiet moment, I felt a deep gratitude for my grandfather's final lesson, perhaps his most important one, that true family is defined by love and respect, not merely by bloodlines or legal documents. The legacy he left me was more than money or property. It was the understanding that how we treat others reveals who we truly are. It was the courage to stand firm in one's values, even in the face of manipulation or rejection. And it was the wisdom to recognize that forgiveness does not require forgetting, but it does allow for new beginnings. As I drove back to the house that was now truly mine, I reflected on how quickly life could change. In just 24 hours, I had gone from being homeless to owning a $56 million company. But the real transformation had taken much longer and reached far deeper than any legal transfer of assets. I had learned that sometimes losing everything is the only way to discover what truly matters. And that lesson was the greatest inheritance of all. The third autumn after I took over the company, Edward walked into my office holding an old leather-bound sketchbook. It was an object I had never seen before. He placed it on my oak desk, a desk my grandfather himself had designed and built. "I found this while cleaning out some old boxes," he said, his voice a little hesitant. "It was your mother's." My heart pounded. I opened the book carefully. Inside were exquisite pencil sketches of furniture designs. The lines were elegant, the curves subtle. They were both classic and startlingly modern. I had never known my mother, who died when I was too young to remember, had been so talented. "She always dreamed of being a designer," Edward said quietly, looking over my shoulder. "She and your grandfather, they had big plans, but then you came along and she got sick." His voice trailed off. For the first time, I saw a crack in his emotional armor. It wasn't calculated regret, but real old grief. "Why did you never tell me?" I asked. "It was too painful," he admitted. "After she died, I packed everything of hers away. I thought if I didn't see it, I wouldn't feel it. I buried her with my grief." He looked at me, his eyes unusually clear. "And I almost buried you with it too." That moment felt like a tectonic shift in our relationship. The final layer of ice seemed to melt away. "These designs are beautiful," I said, tracing a sketch of an armchair with delicate lines. "We should make them." Edward looked up, a spark igniting in his eyes. "You think so?" "I know so," I replied. "I think it's time we brought my mother's legacy into the company." That project became the bridge between us. We worked together, Edward dredging up his memories to interpret my mother's notes and I using my understanding of the modern market to adapt the designs. We spent hours in the workshop discussing woods, finishes, and fabrics. It wasn't just about building furniture, it was about rebuilding a broken relationship. We named the collection the Annabelle Collection, after my mother. When we launched it at a prestigious design fair in New York, it was a resounding success. Critics praised the blend of classic design and modern sensibility. Orders poured in. On the night of the launch, after the crowds had thinned, Edward and I stood alone among the beautiful pieces of furniture. The warm gallery lighting gleamed on the grain of the walnut and the softness of the velvet. "She would have been so proud," Edward said, his voice thick with emotion, "of the collection. And of you." He placed a hand on my shoulder, a simple gesture that carried the weight of years of distance and eventual reconciliation. In that moment, he wasn't a business rival or a distant parent. He was simply my father. "I think she would have been proud of you too," I said. On the way back to the hotel, Edward handed me an envelope. Inside was a legal document. "I want you to have this," he said. "My lawyer drafted it. I am relinquishing all future claims to the company. Arthur's reconciliation clause. I don't need it anymore. Seeing Annabelle's designs come to life working with you, that's my real legacy." I looked at him, stunned. "Are you sure?" He nodded, a genuine, unforced smile appearing for the first time I could remember. "Ashworth Artisans is yours, Clara. You've earned it. You've proven yourself far more worthy than I ever was." When I signed the papers the next day, I felt a sense of closure. The circle was complete. My grandfather's final test hadn't just been about whether Edward would provide for me. It was about whether he could find his way back to family, to love beyond the shadow of money. And in the end, he had. The success of the Annabelle collection propelled Ashworth Artisans to new heights. We were no longer just a respected handcrafted furniture company. We had become a trend-setting brand. My reputation in the industry was solidified, not as the lucky heiress, but as a visionary leader who had blended heritage with innovation. My relationship with Edward continued to evolve. Relinquishing his claim to the company seemed to have freed him from the last vestiges of expectation and resentment. He continued to serve on the advisory board, But his role changed. He became a true mentor, sharing his business experience freely without any hidden agenda. Our family dinners became regular and relaxed. We talked about everything and nothing, rebuilding bridges that had been burned long ago. One beautiful Sunday afternoon, about 4 years after I took over, Edward and I were walking through the gardens my grandfather had so carefully tended. The roses were in full bloom, their fragrance filling the air. "You know, your grandfather proposed to your grandmother right here under that rose arbor," Edward said, pointing to a wooden structure covered in deep red blooms. I smiled. "He never told me that." "There's a lot I never told you," he said, stopping and turning to face me. "Clara, I know I can't change the past. I know sorry is too small a word for what I did. But I hope you know how proud I am of you. Not because of the company, but because of who you are. Your kindness, your strength, you have your mother's heart, and your grandfather's spirit." Those words, spoken simply and sincerely, meant more to me than any business success. They were the approval I had craved my entire life. But now, receiving it, I realized I no longer needed it. I had found my own worth. Still hearing it healed an old wound I hadn't known I still carried. "I'm proud of you too, Dad," I said, and I meant it. A few weeks later, I received a call from Daniel Peterson. His voice sounded urgent. "Clara, I have some news," he said. "It concerns a property Arthur set up years ago. A blind trust that even I didn't know the full details of until now. It just matured." "Another trust?" I asked, confused. "This one is different. It's not about the company. It's about a piece of property in rural Vermont. A small house and a workshop." "I don't understand," I said. "Arthur bought it right after your mother died," Mr. Peterson explained. "The terms of the trust were very specific. It was to remain hidden until his granddaughter, Clara Ashworth, and his son, Edward Ashworth, jointly signed a legal document demonstrating a full and voluntary reconciliation. Edward's letter relinquishing his claim on the company, it triggered the final clause. A sense of awe washed over me. My grandfather, even from beyond the grave, was still orchestrating events. He hadn't just planned for Edward's failure, he had planned for his redemption. "What's in the trust?" I asked. "The keys," Mr. Peterson said, "and a letter." The following week, Edward and I drove up to Vermont together. The long drive was quiet, both of us lost in our own thoughts. The small house was tucked away in a green valley next to a babbling brook. It was simple and beautiful. The workshop next to it was larger than the house, with huge windows looking out into the forest. Inside the house, on the simple kitchen table, was an envelope with both of our names on it. I opened it and read it aloud. "My dearest Edward and Clara, if you are reading this letter together, it means the impossible has happened. You have found your way back to each other. I bought this place as a sanctuary, a place to escape after Annabelle died. But it always felt empty. A workshop needs a craftsman, and a house needs a family. Edward." I know you always felt crushed by the shadow of Ashworth artisans. You were always trying to prove yourself in an arena I think you thought I wanted for you, but I always knew your true heart was not in boardrooms, but in the workshop. You have the hands of a craftsman just like me. This place is your son. A fresh start. A place to create something of your own without the weight of the Ashworth name. Do what you love. And Clara, my dear granddaughter, your legacy is the company, but your gift is the ability to see the best in people. You gave your father the gift of forgiveness, and in doing so, you freed you both. Love each other. Build something together. The real legacy isn't wood or money. It's love. Yours always, Arthur. Tears streamed down my cheeks as I finished reading. Edward stood by the window looking out at the workshop, his back to me. But I could see his shoulders shaking. After a long moment, he turned around. "He was always one step ahead of us, wasn't he?" he said with a trembling smile. "Always," I agreed. We spent the rest of the day exploring the workshop. It was fully equipped with the finest tools, some still new in their boxes. On one workbench, There was a set of chisels with Edward's initials carved into the handles. "I think I'll stay here for a while," Edward said, picking up one of the chisels, feeling its weight in his palm. And I knew he would. He had found his home. And in doing so, it felt like I had found a missing piece of myself as well. Arthur's legacy wasn't a single thing to be handed down. It was a tapestry woven from many different threads, the company, the Oakhaven house, the Vermont workshop, each finding its rightful place in the story of our family. Life at Ashworth. Artisans continued, but with a new sense of peace. Edward, finding joy in his Vermont workshop, had freed him from the pressure and bitterness of the past. It freed me too, no longer feeling the heavy responsibility of being the one to fix the cracks in our family. Our relationship was now about genuine connection, not dependency. Edward would often send me photos of his new projects, intricate wood sculptures, unique furniture pieces he was creating in his retreat. I recognized in those images the passion my grandfather had spoken of, a bright spark that Edward had tried to extinguish for so many years. I had built Ashworth Artisans into a solid brand, upholding its commitment to quality and innovation. The Arthur Ashworth Foundation had also flourished, providing scholarships to dozens of young people each year to learn both traditional and modern crafts. I often spent time meeting the students, and each time I saw the true inheritance of my grandfather's legacy, not just material wealth, but opportunity and kindness. One afternoon, as I was reviewing new wood samples in the design room, my secretary Sarah reported, "There's a call from Mr. Peterson, Clara. He says it's urgent." My heart tightened. Mr. Peterson only called when something was important. "Put him through immediately." "Hello, Clara." Mr. Peterson's voice sounded serious. "I need to see you right away. Something has come up regarding a clause in Arthur's will that I either missed or didn't realize the significance of until now." "What is it?" I asked, a sense of unease creeping in. "It's better if we meet in person. Can you come to the office this afternoon?" I arrived at Mr. Peterson's office with a persistent sense of dread. He was sitting behind his desk, looking contemplative. He didn't greet me with his usual warm smile, but with a solemn nod. "Clara," he began, gesturing to the chair opposite him. "I've spent the last few days reviewing all of Arthur's documents after recent events, and I found a hidden clause that was only activated by a very specific factor." Mr. Peterson slid a blue file across the desk toward me. "This clause pertains to a piece of land in the lake region north of Oakhaven. Arthur purchased it around the time your grandfather was a young man, and it has been kept remarkably secret." "A piece of land?" I asked. "For what?" "In the original will," Mr. Peterson explained, "Arthur had a clause stating that if his son Edward and his granddaughter Clara could not find a path to reconciliation within 5 years of his death, this land would be auctioned off and the proceeds donated to a charity unrelated to Ashworth Artisans. However, if they did reconcile, that clause would be nullified." "But we did reconcile," I said. "My father and I—" "Exactly," Mr. Peterson interrupted. "And that's why the second clause was triggered. Arthur had a contingency plan, a final condition. It states that if the reconciliation happens voluntarily and without manipulation, the land is not to be sold. Instead, it is to be given to the most deserving heir to fulfill a special mission." "What mission?" I asked, my heart pounding. Mr. Peterson handed me another letter, carefully sealed. "This is from Arthur. He wanted you to read it." I broke the seal and began to read. "My dearest Clara, if you are reading this letter, you have passed my final test. You have shown that you have not just a heart, but a mind. You have rebuilt what was broken and have brought peace to our family. The land in the northern lake region is not just land. It was a place where Sarah and I used to vacation. Your mother always dreamed of a place where people could find healing and inspiration. A place for young artists, craftsmen, people with talent but lacking opportunity. I want you to build the Ashworth Legacy Retreat there. A center for creativity where young people can learn, create, and find their voice. It will be a place to celebrate creativity, craftsmanship, and community. It will be your mother's legacy built by you to bring opportunity to others. This is a big project, Clara. It will require courage, perseverance, and an open heart. But I trust you. Let Ashworth Artisans fund it. Let Edward help with the design of the structures. Let the Arthur Ashworth Foundation provide scholarships for the students. Make it a place that your mother and I would be proud of. Yours always, Arthur. I set the letter down, overcome with emotion. Awe, gratitude, and a sense of a great purpose calling to me. It wasn't just a business project. It was a mission, a continuation of my grandfather's philosophy of touching lives and building a legacy not just with wood, but with people. My grandfather once again had seen further than any of us. He had seen not just the future of a company, but the future of a family. I looked at Mr. Peterson, a radiant smile on my face. He did it again. Yes. Mr. Peterson nodded, his expression finally softening. He was always a man of surprises. The world before me was no longer just streets or profit margins. It was a bigger picture, a vision of healing creativity and community. And I, Clara Ashworth, was ready to paint it. I had found my purpose not just in running a company, but in building a legacy that transcended any wood or property. It was a legacy of love, forgiveness, and opportunity woven from the threads of a family that had found its way back to each other. 5 years later, the summer sun dipped behind the lush green hills of Vermont, casting a golden glow across the clear lake. I stood on the veranda of the main lodge at the Ashworth Legacy Retreat, looking out over the bustling campus. Laughter and soft music drifted on the air, mingling with the rhythmic tap of hammers from the woodworking studios and the click-clack of looms. The retreat was a dream made real, a testament to my grandfather's and mother's vision. Beautifully designed timber and stone buildings dotted the landscape, each one a dedicated space for creation, a pottery studio, a photography, darkroom, a weaving studio, and of course, state-of-the-art woodworking shops. Edward, with his artist eye and master's hand, had overseen the construction of every detail, creating a space that was both functional and breathtakingly beautiful. Tonight was the retreat's first graduation ceremony. 20 young artists and craftspeople who had spent a year here on a full scholarship from the Arthur Ashworth Foundation were preparing to showcase their work. They came from all over the country, each with a story, a talent, and a hope. Looking at them, I saw the true legacy living and breathing. Edward came to stand beside me, holding 2 glasses of wine. He looked healthier and happier than I had ever seen him, his skin tanned from working outdoors and his eyes sparkling with pride. "Quite a sight, isn't it?" he said, handing me a glass. "It's perfect," I agreed. "Mom would have loved this." "She's here," he said quietly, "in every detail, in every piece of art, and in you." We clinked our glasses in silence, a deep understanding having formed between us over the years. Our path had not been easy. It had been fraught with pain and misunderstanding, but it had led us here. To peace. To a real family. Daniel Peterson, now retired, but still a dear friend, joined us on the veranda, along with Angela, my best friend. Angela had become the marketing director for Ashworth Artisans, and her acumen had helped the company thrive even more. "Clara, this is incredible," Angela said, giving me a hug. "You did it." "We did it," I corrected. As night fell, we gathered in the main gallery where the students' work was displayed. There were exquisitely carved chairs, intricately woven tapestries, haunting photographs, and unique ceramic pieces. Each work told a story of growth and discovery. I was asked to say a few words. As I stood before the crowd, looking out at the young, eager faces, I didn't see myself as a CEO or a wealthy heiress. I saw myself as Arthur's granddaughter, the one he had taught that true value lies in giving. 10 years ago, I began, I thought I had lost everything, but sometimes losing what you think you need is the only way to discover who you really are and what you were truly meant to do. I told them my story, not the polished version, but the real story of lost betrayal and ultimately forgiveness and reconciliation. I spoke of the will of my grandfather's test and of the most valuable lesson I had learned, that a legacy is not what you leave behind, but what you build in the lives of others. Tonight, I concluded, my voice catching with emotion. As we admire this incredible artwork, we see more than just talent. We see potential unleashed. We see dreams nurtured. And we see the legacy of a man who believed that true wealth is measured in lives touched. Congratulations to all of you. You are that legacy. The applause was thunderous. Later, as people milled about admiring the art, a young woman, a gifted woodworker from a small town in Appalachia, approached me. "Ms. Ashworth," she said, her eyes shining, "I just wanted to thank you. This place, it changed my life. Before coming here, I never thought someone like me could make something beautiful." "You are the beautiful thing," I told her. "Your talent, your spirit. We just provided the wood and the tools." As I watched her walk back to her piece, a coffee table made from reclaimed maple with impossibly elegant lines, I felt a profound sense of completion. This was it. This was the answer to it all. The cruelty of my father that day, the pain and the uncertainty had all been part of a longer, more complex path that led to this moment. Later, when the last of the guests had departed, I took a walk alone by the edge of a lake. The moonlight danced on the water. I thought of my grandfather, of my mother, and of the strange journey that had brought me here. The will hadn't just been a legal document. It had been a map, a series of lessons designed to guide not only me but my father as well through the darkness and into the light. It wasn't a story about inheriting $56 million. It was a story about discovering something far more precious, the understanding that families can be broken and remade, that forgiveness has the power to transform, and that the greatest legacy we can hope to leave is to make the world a little better than we found it. And in the quiet of the Vermont night, I knew with an unshakable certainty that we had.